I'm Evelyn Moore, and I thought the hardest choice I'd ever make was giving up my dreams for the sake of my family. But the night my father demanded I marry a man I barely knew to save our bakery, and my mother said nothing, I realized betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. They stole my future with one signature, and they had no idea I'd come back to take everything. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I'd love to see how far this story travels. The scent of cinnamon clung to the air like a ghost. It was just after closing, and the only light came from the swinging bulb above the prep table. I was still in my apron, crusted with flour, when my father dropped a thick stack of legal papers onto the counter like a gavel. "You'll marry Jackson Carmichael," he said, his voice low but resolute. "His family's investment will keep us afloat." My fingers tightened around the wooden rolling pin, the one my grandmother Rosie used to teach me how to shape dough with patience and love. Her handwriting still danced across the recipe card tucked behind the sugar jar. "Knead gently," it read, "but know when to stand firm." She'd never taught me how to survive a business negotiation disguised as an ambush. I stared at the papers, stunned. "What? Evie!" My mother stepped forward, her manicured hands folded neatly in front of her. She always looked pristine in the bakery, like she belonged in a boutique, not behind the counter. "This is our best option. The Carmichaels have deep pockets. We've tried everything else." That wasn't true. I had suggested other ways, a loan against the property, a community fundraiser, a rebrand that highlighted Grandma Rosie's legacy. Every idea had been dismissed with a wave, a sigh, or a look exchanged between them when they thought I wasn't watching. "This isn't a request," my father said, eyes hard. "It's a solution." I laughed, but it cracked in my throat. "You're selling me off to save the ovens." "To save what your grandmother built," my mother corrected sharply. Her voice was coated in honey, but it burned going down. I looked at her then, really looked. She didn't seem sad. She wasn't crying, just waiting for me to comply. And that was the moment something inside me shifted. I wasn't just shocked, I was alone. Jackson Carmichael was a name I knew, in the way you know a distant storm is coming even before you hear the thunder. We'd met once, briefly, at a city chamber event. Polished, polite, the son of a man who bought up Charleston Real Estate like it was candy. He hadn't looked at me twice. And now he was supposed to be my husband. My hand trembled as I touched the corner of the contract. "Do I even get to meet him again before I sign my life away?" "He's agreed to the terms," my father said. "We have dinner with the family next week." I swallowed hard. "What if I say no?" My father's jaw clenched. "Then we lose everything. The bank takes the building, your mother and I file bankruptcy, Rosie's goes under." The guilt hit like a freight train. My grandmother's smiling face in the old photo above the register, flower on her cheeks, love in her eyes seemed to watch me. She'd built this place from nothing, brick by brick, recipe by recipe. She believed in legacy. She believed in me. I heard myself whisper, "Okay." The rolling pin slipped from my fingers onto the counter with a dull thud. "I'll do it." My voice cracked in the silence that followed. My father turned away, already relieved. My mother gave a nod like a business deal had been closed. Neither said thank you. Neither asked if I was okay. And as I stood there, surrounded by the ghosts of cinnamon and salt, I realized something bitter. I wasn't part of this family. I was their collateral. That night, the bakery felt colder than usual, even with the ovens still radiating warmth below. I climbed the narrow back staircase to the attic, gripping the rail like it might anchor me to something real. With each creaking step, my chest tightened. Up there, dust floated in the air like slow snowfall, and the slanted ceiling turned golden from the one flickering bulb. This had been Grandma Rosie's quiet haven, a place for her thoughts, her old baking journals, and sometimes for us. I used to sit cross-legged on that braided rug, watching her sort flour into big glass jars. "You don't rush bread, Evie," she'd always say. "You wait, and when it's ready, you'll know." Now those same jars sat silent, labeled in her careful cursive, bread flour, rye, semolina. Next to them were stacks of yellowed recipe cards, some water-stained, some torn at the corners, but all infused with her spirit. Her handwriting made my heart ache. I knelt beside a rusted metal tin and opened it. Inside were blackened white photos, bundled with string. One showed Grandma Rosie in her 20s, flour on her cheek, holding a giant sourdough round like a trophy. Another, one I'd forgotten, was of the two of us. I couldn't have been older than 6, cheeks smeared with jam, arms around her neck. We were laughing. My fingers brushed the photo. I felt it in my throat, the guilt, the heartbreak, the fear. I wasn't doing this marriage for me. I was doing it to keep her alive in this town. If Rosie's bakery closed, her name would vanish from Charleston streets, and with it, every memory tied to that warm, yeasty smell that made strangers feel at home. Beneath the photos, I found the challah braid pan. That did it. Suddenly, I was 5 again, standing on a wooden step stool, sticky fingers twisting dough under her gentle guidance. "You'll carry on our heart, Evie," she had whispered once, brushing my bangs from my forehead. "One day, all this will be yours." I sat back on my heels, eyes brimming. I didn't know if she'd be proud of me for agreeing to the marriage, or if she'd tell me to run. "Am I doing this right?" I whispered to no one. The silence answered like it always did, soft but unyielding. I could almost hear her voice. "When things feel impossible, do the next small thing." So I stayed in that attic a little longer, lighting an old lavender candle from one of her shoebox collections and opening a weathered notebook filled with frosting notes, cupcake sketches, scribbled pie ratios. The pages still smelled faintly of vanilla. The world outside could spin into chaos, but up here I could breathe. I wasn't just saving the bakery. I was saving my last piece of her. I don't remember falling asleep, just waking up curled in a blanket that hadn't been there when I arrived. My mom must have come up at some point, but she hadn't said a word. Typical. No apology, no warmth, just silent logistics. I stretched my aching legs and stood facing the attic window. The streetlights flickered below. The bakery's faded sign glowed faintly. Rosie's, painted in lilac against weather-worn brick. I'd said yes. I couldn't undo it now. But standing in that window, I swore to myself, I might be marrying into the Carmichaels, but I would never belong to them. This was for Rosie. For her legacy. And for every child who wandered into the shop and found something more than sugar and butter. If I had to give up my own dreams to protect hers, then so be it. But if they ever tried to take the bakery away from me, they'd find out just how much of Rosie lived on in me. Weddings are supposed to be joyful. People cry, yes, but happy tears. This wasn't that. The morning of my wedding felt like someone else's life. I watched from the vanity as a makeup artist brushed blush across my cheeks with mechanical precision, like she was painting a doll. My hair had been twisted into an elegant low chignon, tiny pearl pins tucked in like secrets. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," my mother said from the chaise across the room, sipping champagne. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The veil sat in my lap like a net, waiting to trap me. We were in a guest suite at the Carmichael estate, a grand coastal property just outside Charleston, perched arrogantly near the water like it owned the tides. I'd never been here until last night. It smelled of cedar and money, the kind of house where quiet had a different texture. Thick, heavy. There were fresh-cut roses in every room, and the dress, chosen by Jackson's mother, hung on a padded hanger like it might change my mind. "Lace is timeless," she had said at the final fitting, her voice syrupy. "It photographs well." The gown was gorgeous, objectively speaking. Off-white, fitted through the waist with delicate embroidery down the train. But none of it felt like me. None of this did. When the photographer arrived, I put on my practiced smile. You learn how to smile with just your lips when your heart's not in it. Eyes can't fake what they aren't allowed to feel. Jackson arrived half an hour before the ceremony for a staged, first-look moment. I turned to see him at the far end of the garden path, dressed in a navy blue suit that made him look like the cover of a Southern wedding magazine. His tie was straight, his hair perfectly sculpted. His expression, though, was unsure. "Evie," he said quietly, stepping closer. I swallowed and nodded. "You look beautiful." His eyes lingered on my face, trying to meet mine. "We can make this work, you know." Make this work. Like we were business partners, not two people about to vow eternity. "I'm not here to be difficult," he added when I didn't respond. "You're doing a hard thing, I respect that." I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but I couldn't. Instead, I turned away and adjusted my veil. It fluttered gently in the sea breeze like a white flag. The ceremony was held under a floral archway by the cliffs. Dozens of guests sat fanning themselves with ivory programs, murmuring behind designer sunglasses. I caught phrases as I walked down the aisle. She's marrying into wealth. Poor thing looks pale. Probably arranged. They weren't wrong. But they didn't know the whole story. Jackson's parents beamed from the front row, whispering to each other as if they'd just acquired new art for their foyer. My mother looked proud. My father, unreadable. He wouldn't even meet my gaze. And there I stood, lace-bound and locked in a smile, while the officiant began to speak. "Do you, Evelyn Moore, take Jackson Reed Carmichael?" I said the words, or maybe I just moved my lips. I can't remember. All I know is that the crowd clapped, cameras clicked, and someone wiped away a tear like it was a happy ending. The reception was a blur of champagne and curated string quartets. People kept calling me Mrs. Carmichael, and every time it scraped against my ribs like a wrong note in a song. Jackson tried to make small talk. "My parents really went all out," he said beside me at the sweetheart table. "There." Excited. I picked at my plate. "That makes one of us." He looked down, nodding slightly. "You don't have to pretend, Evelyn. I'm not going to force a fairy tale." That surprised me. He wasn't cruel, not smug, just resigned, but it didn't matter. None of it did. The bakery was still at risk. My freedom was already signed away. And the cake, 3 tiers of lemon and lavender, tasted like sawdust. When the last dance ended and the guests left in a swirl of laughter and sparklers, Jackson offered his arm as we walked toward the waiting car. "We'll figure it out," he said softly, not looking at me. "However long it takes." I didn't reply. The veil was gone, but I still couldn't breathe. Our new home looked like something out of a real estate brochure. 2 stories of beige brick and symmetrical charm, nestled on a quiet cul-de-sac where neighbors waved from driveways and children zipped by on scooters. A perfectly nice place to start a life I hadn't chosen. The movers were gone by noon. The house echoed in that strange, hollow way that new spaces do, everything pristine, nothing familiar. Jackson carried the last box in himself. He set it by the fireplace, glanced at me, and offered a tight, nervous smile. "Kitchen's yours," he said. "I figured that was non-negotiable." I blinked. "What?" He pointed to the island counter. "Gas stove, double oven," I made sure. My mom wanted to remodel, but I told her not to touch it. It was the first time he'd done something for me, not the optics. I murmured a quiet thanks and walked past him into the kitchen. It was beautiful, honestly. Cream cabinets, gold hardware, butcher block counters. The kind of kitchen that looked ready for cinnamon mornings. But I still felt like a guest in someone else's life. That evening, I tried to find comfort in routine. I scrubbed the sink until it gleamed. I arranged the spices alphabetically. I ironed every towel, folded them, then refolded them because the edges weren't quite even. Jackson leaned in the doorway with a glass of water. "You don't have to keep busy for my sake." I froze. "I'm just settling in." He stepped further into the room, still keeping a polite distance. "You're allowed to be angry, Evelyn, or sad, or silent. I'm not expecting anything from you except honesty." That threw me. He wasn't trying to coax me into playing wife. He wasn't hinting at obligation. He just looked tired and human. "You don't have to pretend with me," he added. "I'm not here to hurt you." The words hung between us, soft and steady. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel," I admitted. "My family made a deal and I'm the currency." Jackson nodded, then gently set his glass down. "I know what it's like to be used as leverage. My whole life's been one long negotiation. Carmichael this, Carmichael that. I got used to being useful. But it's not the same as being chosen." I didn't know what to say, so I offered the only thing I had, dinner. That night I made garlic-seared chicken and roasted carrots plated neatly in silence. Jackson poured wine, asked if I liked the chairs, and told me which drawer held the silverware. Halfway through the meal, he put down his fork and said, "I know you didn't want this, but you're here now, so if there's ever anything you need to feel more like yourself, I want to know." Something cracked a little in my chest. Not a full break, just a hairline shift. "I'd like a lemon tree," I blurted, surprising both of us. Jackson tilted his head. "A lemon tree? There used to be one behind the bakery," I said softly. "My grandmother planted it when I was 8. She said we'd never run out of brightness." He smiled, and it wasn't polite, it was real. "Then we'll plant one." After dinner, he cleared the table without being asked, washed every dish, wiped the counters. He didn't brag about it, didn't ask for applause. He just did it. When I finally settled into bed, I expected the silence to smother me. But it didn't, because down the hall, I heard him softly humming some old tune while brushing his teeth, like a man trying to remember who he was before all the noise. I curled into the blanket and stared at the ceiling. Maybe I didn't have to make sense of it all right now. Maybe survival wasn't about fixing everything at once. Maybe it started with one quiet dinner and a lemon tree. Exactly 1 week after our wedding, we were back at the Carmichael estate, only this time it wasn't as guests. It was family. That word still felt foreign in my mouth. I stood at the base of their grand staircase, smoothing the front of my slate blue dress. The color had been suggested by Jackson's mother, Lila Carmichael. "You've got the skin for cool tones," she'd said during brunch last weekend. And the board always responds better to elegance than flash. The board. Apparently, even family dinners in this household were performance art. Jackson appeared at my side and offered his arm. "You don't have to say much tonight," he murmured. "Just smile when they toast." "Toast to what?" He gave a rueful half-grin. "Us, the merger." The way he said it, not wedding, not union, sent a shiver through me, but I nodded anyway. The dining room was a study in curated opulence. A crystal chandelier glittered above a table set for 12, though only 6 places were filled. A massive oil painting of some steamboat loomed on the far wall. The room smelled of truffle oil and lavender polish. Lila stood as we entered, arms open. "Evelyn, darling, look at you. That dress is perfection. And your hair, did you do it yourself?" I nodded, resisting the urge to tuck a loose strand behind my ear. "You really are a natural beauty," she said, cupping my cheek lightly before guiding me to my seat. Jackson's father, Emery Carmichael, raised his glass. "To Evelyn," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "And to the future of Carmichael and Rose Bakeries, our investment is already paying off." Everyone lifted their glasses. I hesitated, then joined. "Thank you," I said, careful and cautious. "That means a lot." But it didn't feel like a toast to us. It felt like a business quarterly. Conversation buzzed on as dinner was served. Herb-crusted lamb with roasted parsnips, and some sort of pureed thing I couldn't identify. I answered questions about the bakery, about my grandmother's original recipes, about which suppliers we used and whether we had considered expanding our gluten-free options. At one point, Emery leaned in and said, "It's smart of you to marry legacy to capital. Most girls your age chase love instead of leverage." I smiled, because what else could I do? Across the table, Jackson watched me carefully. His brow furrowed slightly, just enough for me to know he heard it too, but he didn't intervene. Later, over espresso served in porcelain cups with hand-painted rims, Lila shared plans for a possible rebranding campaign. Nothing drastic, of course, just a refresh. Rosie's is charming, but we were thinking. Carmichael Rose has a more contemporary ring, blends both names, sounds upscale. The room quieted. I blinked. "Carmichael Rose." "Yes," she said brightly. "You'd still run day-to-day, of course, but the brand needs polish, prestige." My fingers tightened around the espresso cup. They weren't just saving the bakery. They were absorbing it, my bakery, Grandma Rosie's life. I glanced at Jackson, but he was stirring sugar into his cup, expression unreadable. "You've built something special, Evelyn," Emery added smoothly. "Now we'll take it to the next level." A murmur of agreement followed. I smiled. I nodded. I said all the right things. But inside, something tensed, pulled tight. When the dinner finally ended, Lila handed me a small velvet box on the way out. "Just a little welcome to the family," she said. Inside was a gold bracelet with a tiny rose charm and a C etched into the clasp. A perfect symbol of everything this night had been. I smiled and thanked her. And then, in the car ride home, I stared out the window and whispered to myself, this isn't about rescuing a bakery. It's about control. When Jackson suggested a honeymoon, I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt absurd. A honeymoon for what? A corporate merger? A signed truce? But he just smiled and said, "You need air." "So do I," and then he showed me the cabin. It wasn't a 5-star resort or some over-the-top Caribbean escape like I'd feared. It was tucked deep in the Smoky Mountains, surrounded by pine and quiet. 2 hours from Charleston, 3 turns off a winding road and 1 gravel path that made my teeth rattle in my skull. But when we pulled up, I exhaled. The cabin was simple: cedar logs, stone chimney, wide porch. There were rocking chairs, of course. Every proper Southern cabin has them. And inside, it smelled like wood smoke and old books. "This used to be my grandmother's," Jackson said, setting our bags down gently by the front door. "She left it to me. It's not much, but I thought you might like it better than a suite with a butler." "I do," I said, and meant it. The silence here was different, not the kind that weighed on your chest. This silence breathed. The first day passed quietly. We hiked a little, just a flat trail behind the cabin. Jackson pointed out things: bare scratches on bark, a stream that ran sweet even in summer. We didn't talk much, but it wasn't uncomfortable. That night, we ate leftover stew by the fire. I wore thick socks and a borrowed hoodie of his that smelled like cedar and faint cologne. He offered to sleep on the couch, but I told him not to be ridiculous. The bed was king-sized. There was space. Neither of us slept much. Thunder rolled in sometime after midnight. I woke to rain hammering the roof, heavy and insistent. For a while I just lay there, listening, watching the shadows flicker on the log walls. Then I heard a noise, not thunder, not wind, something closer, something alive. I padded out of bed, pulled the blanket tighter around me, and peeked out the kitchen window just in time to see Jackson darting across the porch in his flannel pajamas, wielding a broom like a weapon. "What on earth?" A loud clang followed, then a low grunt. Jackson stumbled back inside, soaked and panting, eyes wide. "Bear," he said between breaths. "Trash can, big guy." He was dripping wet, hair plastered to his forehead, broom in one hand, one slipper missing. I stared at him for a long second and then burst out laughing. The kind of laugh that takes you by surprise. The kind you don't know you've been holding in until it comes out in one long, cracked breath. He looked startled for a second, then joined in. It was the first time we'd both laughed, really laughed, since the wedding. And in that absurd, soggy moment, something shifted. "I guess I'm braver than I look," he said, brushing water from his brow. "Or dumber. Maybe both." I handed him a towel and sat down beside the fire as he changed into dry clothes. When he returned, hair tousled and in a clean shirt, he looked normal, relatable, less like a Carmichael and more like a man who just tried to reason with a bear. We sat in silence for a while, the storm rattling the windows, the fire crackling between us. Finally, he said, "You're different here. Quieter. Softer." I sipped my tea. "Maybe I can breathe here. I hope you know," he said slowly, "you're not the only one who gave something up." I looked at him then, really looked. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of something real behind the smooth charm and tailored suits. Loneliness, just like mine. We didn't touch. We didn't try to redefine anything. But we sat there, the storm raging outside and silence warming between us. And I thought maybe I can survive this. Maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to do it alone. The scent of roasted pumpkin filled the air, warm and velvety with a hint of nutmeg. I stirred the soup slowly, letting the rhythm settle my nerves. After everything, the wedding, the uneasy dinner, the stormy honeymoon, I'd come back craving comfort. Home-cooked food, familiar faces. The kitchen I grew up in. Jackson had dropped me off at my parents' house that afternoon, kissing my cheek softly before heading to a meeting. "You've got this," he whispered, and I believed just for a second that I did. My mother sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through real estate listings on her iPad. My father stood by the window with a tumbler of scotch, even though it was barely 5. They hadn't asked how the trip was. They hadn't asked anything at all. Still, I pushed forward, trying to bridge the gap. "The cabin was peaceful," I said, setting the bowls on the table. "I think I laughed for the first time in weeks." My father grunted. My mother offered a perfunctory, "That's nice, dear," without looking up. I took a seat, tried again. "Jackson was kind. We didn't pretend anything we weren't. He even scared off a bear." That earned me a glance, barely. The soup steamed between us. Silence lingered. Then my father cleared his throat, setting his glass down with a sharp click. "We need to talk about the bakery." My hand paused halfway to my spoon. "What about it?" He didn't flinch, didn't ease into it. Just said the words with the same tone he used to tell me my tire pressure was low. We've decided to sell. The contracts are finalized. I blinked. I must have misheard. Sell, I repeated, breath catching. You sold Rosie's. My mother looked up then, eyes blank. The offer was good, too good to pass up. My ears rang. But I got married to keep the bakery. That's the whole reason I agreed. Jackson's family, your deal. It served its purpose, my father interrupted. The Carmichaels' money stabilized our books, gave us time to secure a buyer. My spoon clinked against the bowl. I stared at the orange swirl of pumpkin like it might explain something, anything that made this make sense. You told me, my voice cracked. You said we were saving it, that it would stay in the family. Well, we are family, my mother said coolly. But your father and I want to retire. We're moving to Portugal. Portugal, like that made any of this less insane. You're leaving, I asked. Just like that. It's been in the works for months, she replied. We didn't want to tell you until it was done. I pushed back from the table, heart racing. You didn't want to tell me, or you knew I'd fight you. My father sighed as if I were being dramatic. Evelyn, it's a building, a business. People let go of things all the time. No, I snapped. It's her. The room stilled. It's Grandma Rosie, her life, her recipes, her name on the front window. You made me believe I was protecting her legacy, and now you've cashed it in like a vacation fund. We're allowed to make choices that benefit us too, my mother said, standing. You have a new life now, a wealthy husband, a beautiful home, let this go. But I couldn't, because it wasn't just about walls and ovens. It was about childhood mornings in flour-dusted aprons, about stories told over dough, about hands that held mine steady as I learned to roll, knead, fold. They weren't just selling a bakery, they were erasing her. Everything I gave up, I whispered. Everything I've sacrificed. And you never intended to keep it. My father drained his glass. Grow up, Evelyn, life moves on. The soup had gone cold. So had I didn't cry that night. I lay in bed with the lights off, wrapped in Jackson's thick cotton sheets, staring at the darkened ceiling while the scent of lavender laundry detergent clung to the pillowcase. But I didn't cry. There were no tears left, just numbness. The kind that fills every corner of your body like thick fog. I couldn't eat, couldn't speak, could barely move. The betrayal had settled into my bones like winter cold. My parents had sold the bakery. Rosie's, just like that, no warning, no family meeting, just paperwork and a smug exit plan to Portugal. They'd stolen the reason I said yes. I didn't go downstairs the next day. Jackson brought me toast and tea. I didn't touch either. He tried again with a soft-boiled egg and a slice of orange, but it sat untouched on the nightstand. I couldn't look at it. I couldn't smell cinnamon without my stomach twisting. The silence between us grew thicker with each hour. By day 3, I hadn't showered. I wore the same t-shirt and leggings. My phone buzzed a few times, probably Jackson's mother, maybe my father, but I didn't check. I couldn't face anyone. I couldn't even face myself. Jackson knocked gently each morning. Do you want company? He'd ask, voice low, respectful. And each time I stayed silent. On the 4th night, he didn't knock. He just came in. I heard the door creak and felt the mattress dip slightly as he sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't turn on the light. Didn't speak right away, just sat there in the dark beside me. Finally, he said, You haven't eaten in 2 days. I didn't answer. I know you're hurting, he added softly. And I won't pretend I can fix this, but I can listen. I turned my face toward the wall. He waited a few more seconds, then gently asked, Will you please tell me what's going on? I closed my eyes. They sold everything, I whispered. The bakery, her legacy, me. Jackson was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'm so sorry, Evelyn. I shook my head. They used me, I gave up my life, my freedom, I stood at an altar and smiled through it, and they never planned to keep her alive, they were just waiting for a better deal. I didn't know, he said. I swear if I'd known, I know, I cut in. It's not you, it's them. He leaned back against the headboard beside me, letting his shoulder touch mine lightly, just enough to feel human again. I hated you at first, I said, voice small. Because you represented everything I was being forced into. I know, he replied quietly, but now I don't even know who to hate. A soft laugh escaped me, bitter, dry, joyless. Jackson didn't flinch. He just whispered, Hate them if you need to. I'll hold the space until you don't. That cracked something open. Just a little. I let my head fall onto his shoulder. Not for comfort exactly, but for steadiness. And he let me stay there. We sat like that for a long while, listening to the refrigerator hum and the faint sound of a dog barking 3 houses away. Outside, the streetlights glowed against the dark. The world kept turning. Inside, I finally breathed, shallow, shaky, but real. "They took her from me," I whispered again. "No," Jackson said. "They tried to." The message came on a Monday morning. I was sitting on the floor in the hallway, knees tucked under me, sorting through unopened mail. Grocery flyers, a catalog from a home goods store, and a postcard from a realtor. "Thinking of selling?" it asked cheerfully. I almost laughed. Then my phone buzzed in my lap, one new message. It was from my father. Just one line: "The business is sold, don't try to reach us." No signature, no explanation, not even a goodbye. I stared at it, blinking, as if my eyes had somehow read it wrong. I tapped the screen. Read it again. Still there. Still final, "Don't try to reach us," like I was a nuisance. A loose end to be tied off. A daughter to be forgotten. I didn't realize I was shaking until the phone slipped from my hand and hit the hardwood with a soft clack. I stared at it lying face up, the words still lit like they were daring me to cry. But I didn't, not right away. I just sat there, frozen. A minute passed, maybe more. The refrigerator hummed. The air conditioning kicked on. Somewhere a neighbor's wind chime caught a breeze. And then the dam broke. A sob escaped me, low and sharp like something torn. My body folded in on itself and I curled into a ball on the floor, the way I used to as a child when nightmares wouldn't let me sleep. My breath hitched. My chest ached. Everything felt loud. Too loud, the silence. The air, the truth, they were gone. I didn't just lose the bakery. I lost them, even if they had never really been mine to begin with. I didn't hear Jackson come in. But suddenly he was there, kneeling beside me, his arms around my shoulders, holding me close. He didn't speak at first. He just let me cry. He pressed my head gently into his chest and smoothed my hair, murmuring soft nothings like balm. Not solutions, not reassurances, just presence. I sobbed into his shirt until it was damp. My fingers gripped his sleeve like I might fall through the floor without it. Finally, in a ragged whisper, I said, "He told me not to reach out." Jackson pulled back slightly to look at me. "Let me see." I handed him the phone. His jaw tightened as he read the message. He didn't curse, didn't yell. He simply held the phone for another second, then handed it back with the calm of someone making a decision. "Then we make this right," he said. I blinked through the tears. "What?" "We make it right," he repeated, firmer now. "Together." His eyes didn't waver. And that's when I saw it, something I hadn't expected. Not pity, not sympathy, conviction. He meant it. This wasn't about saving face or smoothing over a messy family drama. This was about justice, about standing beside me not as a husband on paper, but as a partner in the fight. "They don't get to vanish into the sunset with your grandmother's name in their pocket," he said. "Not without consequences." I swallowed. "They're probably already gone. Then we find them." I wanted to believe him. I needed to, but belief had been costly lately. Still, as I sat there in his arms, the tears drying slowly on my cheeks, I realized something quietly revolutionary. I wasn't alone, not anymore. I took a breath, my first real one in days, and let it settle into my lungs. Jackson leaned his forehead against mine, his voice low. "You tell me what you need, Evelyn, and I will move the earth." Some people fall apart when they're betrayed. Others sharpen. I didn't know which one I was becoming yet. But when Jackson said, "Let me show you something," and led me into his family's private office, I understood we weren't just grieving anymore, we were planning. The Carmichael estate had always intimidated me, but their home office was something else entirely. No gallery portraits, no curated charm, just strategy in wood and leather and silence. The air inside smelled like cedar and something colder, old money and resolve. Emery Carmichael stood by the window, staring down at his phone with reading glasses perched low on his nose. He didn't smile when we entered. He didn't have to. "We started this last night," he said, sliding a thin black folder across the table. "Your parents have been transferring funds offshore for over a year. Small amounts, quiet exits." I flipped open the folder and stared at the unfamiliar names. Luxembourg, the Isle of Man, shell corporations I couldn't pronounce. My hands trembled slightly. "They were preparing to disappear," I whispered. Lila Carmichael stepped into the room, crisp and composed in a slate-gray blouse, holding a tablet already queued up. "They didn't anticipate anyone would trace it or care enough to follow. But we do," Jackson said from behind me. I do. Lila tapped the screen. 2 nights ago, they boarded a private jet out of Atlanta, a quiet charter, unlisted on public flight trackers, but we have ways of knowing. She turned the tablet so I could see. A blurry passport control image, 2 familiar faces, older, colder, and turned slightly from the camera, but unmistakable. My parents. Destination, Sydney, Australia. My chest tightened, but I forced the breath through it. They're really gone. Not gone, Emery corrected, crossing his arms. They're just hiding, and not particularly well. Jackson leaned forward, eyes locked on mine. You don't have to chase this if it hurts too much. I looked at him, really looked. This man I hadn't chosen, not really. And yet here he was, not asking me to forgive or forget, just asking me to decide. They took Rosie's name, I said slowly. They turned her legacy into a check. They lied to me for months, maybe longer. I'm not walking away from this. A silence fell, filled only by the low buzz of Emery's office printer as more documentation slid into a tray. Lila sat gracefully, crossing one leg over the other. We'll notify Australian authorities. With your signature on the business filings, we can press charges, fraud, misrepresentation, and embezzlement. My fingers tightened around the pen she handed me. This isn't just about money, I murmured. No, she replied. It's about name, it's about ownership, and it's about justice. I signed. Jackson watched me, not proud, not relieved, steady, like he was watching something inevitable happen, like he knew I wasn't folding into grief anymore. I was becoming steel. They'll be shocked, I said. They underestimated you, Emery added. They assumed you'd mourn, not mobilize. I did mourn, I whispered, and now I'm done. Jackson placed a hand over mine. We'll fly to Charleston for the hearing. I'll be right next to you. They'll never see it coming, I said, voice quiet but unwavering. No, he said with a glint in his eye, but they'll definitely see you. The courthouse in Charleston hadn't changed. Same arched windows, same creaky benches, same smell of floor polish and cold justice. But I had changed. I stood in the hallway outside courtroom 3B in a navy dress, simple, strong. My hair pulled back, my heels steady on the tile. Jackson stood beside me, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his hand lightly resting on the small of my back. His presence wasn't loud or possessive. It was just there. Across the room, reporters whispered, their cameras lowered for now but itching to rise. The headline was irresistible. Charleston bakery heiress testifies against her own parents in fraud scandal. But I wasn't here for them. I was here for Rosie. And for the girl I used to be, the one who thought loyalty was always deserved. The doors opened with a heavy groan, and then I saw them. My parents led in handcuffed, flanked by federal agents. My mother looked defiant, her lipstick still perfect. My father's jaw was clenched so hard, I thought his teeth might crack. He didn't look at me, not until the judge called my name. Evelyn Rose Moore Carmichael, please approach the witness stand. I walked forward. Each step echoed in my ears. My heart didn't race, it slowed. Like it knew this was the moment I'd been walking toward for months. I raised my right hand, took the oath, sat down. The prosecutor began, "Can you tell the court in your own words what you discovered after your marriage?" My voice didn't shake. My parents used me as leverage in a financial agreement with the Carmichael family, I said. They implied our family bakery was in danger, that it would be lost without outside help. They told me the only way to protect it was to marry into the Carmichaels and secure their investment. The courtroom was silent. They said we'd preserve Grandma Rosie's legacy, that it was the only way to keep her name alive. I agreed. I got married. I left my life behind. I swallowed. Then, barely a week later, they told me they'd sold it anyway, that the deal was already done, that they were moving to Portugal with the profit. Gasps echoed from the gallery. My father finally looked up. His eyes, so familiar, once so warm, were cold now, small. "You ungrateful girl," he snapped, his voice echoing despite the judge's warnings. "We gave you everything." I held his gaze. "No," I said clearly. "You took everything, and you did it smiling." Jackson stood in the front row, unmoving. Beside him, Lila and Emery watched with quiet pride, no performance, no pretense, just presence. When the defense tried to question my understanding of the contracts, the prosecutor objected so swiftly, the judge barely lifted her head. Ms. Carmichael was not involved in any of the fraudulent transfers, the judge stated. She was, in fact, the victim of them. And then came the final moment. The bailiff handed over documents from Australian authorities, bank records, forged signatures, offshore accounts traced back to my parents. The judge reviewed them in silence. And then her gavel struck. Guilty on all counts: financial fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit identity misrepresentation. The courtroom buzzed. My mother's face drained of color. My father turned toward me, eyes sharp, mouth twisted. "You're dead to us," he hissed. Jackson stood. And in that moment, he wasn't quiet anymore. "She's not alone," he said firmly, stepping forward. "She's with us now, and you'll answer for what you did to her and to the name you sold." The courtroom rustled with murmurs of approval, and just like that, it was done. They were escorted out in cuffs, and I sat there, breathless, not with fear but with relief, not because they were punished, but because I had finally spoken. The courthouse steps were warm beneath my heels. The late afternoon sun had slipped from harsh gold into something softer, gentler, like the sky was exhaling with me. I stood just outside the heavy doors where everything had fallen apart and somehow everything had come together. Behind me, reporters clamored for statements. Flashes popped, microphones waved. But Jackson kept them at bay with a single look and a quiet, "No comment today." Today wasn't for sound bites. It was for stillness. We made it down the steps slowly. My legs felt like they hadn't caught up with my heart yet, numb but sturdy. The moment my shoes hit the pavement, Jackson reached for my hand and held it tight. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Then he whispered, "It's over." I nodded, tears brimming, but this time they didn't burn. We walked toward the waiting car. Lila and Emery stood beside it, and when I approached, she opened her arms without hesitation. "No one should have to do what you just did," she said, wrapping me in a surprisingly fierce hug. "But you did, and Rosie would be proud." I let the hug happen, let it sink in that someone somewhere believed I'd done right by Grandma. Emery stepped forward next, a man who rarely offered sentiment. But now he extended his hand, then pulled me into a brief, firm embrace. "You're the daughter we never had," he said plainly, "and we're proud of your strength." The words landed like a balm over every invisible bruise. I didn't realize how much I'd needed anyone to say that until now. We drove home in near silence. My head rested against Jackson's shoulder as the city passed by in slow blurs. I watched the people outside going about their lives, laughing, shopping, living in that oblivious way that only strangers can. And for once, I didn't feel like I was on the outside looking in. I was going somewhere that belonged to me. That evening, as the sun dipped below the tree line behind our house, Jackson and I sat on the back porch with our hands wrapped around mugs of chamomile tea. He had changed out of his suit. I had kicked off my heels. The grass was still damp from morning rain. There was nothing to prove anymore. "So, what now?" he asked, tilting his head. I stared at the horizon for a long time before answering. "Now we rebuild." He nodded, letting the words settle. I looked down at the bracelet on my wrist, the one Lila had given me months ago. The one with the rose charm and the Carmichael C. Back then, it had felt like a chain, a reminder of the price of survival. Now, it felt like a thread, a bridge between two worlds, two names, two people who had chosen to make something new, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Jackson reached over and gently removed the bracelet, then fished something from his pocket. A new one. A silver bangle engraved simply, "Rosie's Legacy." "This is your name," he said softly. "The one that matters most." I ran my fingers over the words. They were quiet, steady, like me. I looked at him, and this time the smile came easily. "We'll open next spring," I said, "under the new name, and this time it'll be ours." His eyes sparkled. "Croissants and justice." I laughed, fully, freely, like a woman who just shed a 1,000-pound coat she didn't know she was wearing. The stars blinked into the sky, and I breathed deeply for the first time in what felt like years. Tomorrow would come. But tonight was peace. A year later, I stood in front of a bakery that bore a different name, but felt more like home than it ever had. The sign above the door gleamed in the morning sun, "Rosie's Legacy." Carved wood, hand-painted lettering, trimmed with soft green ivy. It was everything Grandma would have loved, quiet, beautiful, and rooted in meaning. I adjusted the apron tied snugly at my waist. Jackson was inside, rearranging croissants in the display case like his life depended on it. The soft smell of cinnamon and cardamom drifted into the street. A line was already forming. It was opening day, and I wasn't scared. A light breeze picked up, brushing the hem of my dress against my calves. I glanced at the glass windows, clean, sparkling, framed in floral boxes. There was a portrait of Grandma Rosie hanging just beside the entrance, her face frozen mid-laugh, holding a basket of braided challah. We're ready, Grandma, I thought. Inside, the Carmichaels were buzzing with activity. Lila stood near the register, reviewing inventory and nudging Jackson gently with her elbow. Let your wife do the nerves, dear. You just make sure the card reader works. Emery was at the back, setting out paper napkins with more focus than I'd ever thought napkins deserved. I think it was his way of staying busy, but also of honoring the space he now truly believed in. They weren't silent investors anymore. They were family. Jackson spotted me through the window and rushed out, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and a crooked smile in the other. Coffee for the Queen, he said, handing it to me. You know you're not supposed to flirt with the owner before 8 a.m., I teased. He leaned in close. First customer gets a kiss, not a croissant. I laughed, loudly, unapologetically. It echoed down the street and turned a few heads in line, but I didn't care. That laugh was mine now, no longer borrowed from a past life or held back for approval. I took one last look at the storefront before unlocking the door. My heart thudded, but it wasn't fear this time. It was pride. The bell above the entrance jingled as the first customer stepped inside, a teenage girl with a messy ponytail and paint on her fingers. She looked around, wide-eyed, and whispered, "It smells like comfort." I smiled. Behind the counter, Jackson winked. "Try the challah, it'll change your life." As customers trickled in, the space filled with chatter, warm bread, and the clink of mugs. Every corner buzzed with something alive. Not just business, but heart. Mid-morning, I stepped outside with a tray of samples and caught my reflection in the glass. I barely recognized her, the woman standing tall, apron dusted with flour, hair tied back with confidence instead of convenience. But I liked her. I'd spent so long thinking survival meant silence. That sacrifice made me noble. That letting go was the same as losing. But I was wrong. Survival is saying no. It's choosing to rebuild. It's knowing that legacy isn't just passed down, it's protected. I looked up at Rosie's legacy one last time that morning, took a deep breath, and stepped back into the warmth. And this time the smile on my face wasn't forced. It was mine.